originally started as a sustainable publishing of archival catalogues, we saw that the world offered many opportunities. There are new technologies for a researcher. There has never been so much data and metadata available. And we saw that we needed to maximize the use of these new opportunities. With our working group, we want to bring together collection holding institutions, researchers, and research infrastructures with a central point, metadata. We want to, and this is also the red thread of this session today, we want to bring together international expertise from different international networks, amongst the European Holocaust Research Infrastructure, Archives Portal Europe, Europeana, CESDA, DARIAH, and so on. So this presentation will be short because we have, can I go back? Yes. This presentation will be short because we will have next week also a meeting. So I gladly invite you for this meeting next week. We will put all the data you need in the chat. What we are doing with this working group is, I see there is problems with the slides. It's going, okay. We focus on cooperation. So with our working group, we want to exchange knowledge. We saw that much infrastructures are having the same difficulties, each from their own respective. Some infrastructures found a solution which others could potentially use. And we want with our working group bring together all these solutions. There is also the fact that there is also there is a difference between cooperation and competition. So we focus on cooperation. Resources and staff are a scarce commodity. And so this means, although there is competition between the different infrastructure, it's important for us to put together our resources. We should be aware that collaboration is useful, that we must share know-how without losing sight of the individual interests of our own institution. So we have to find the red line between cooperation versus competition. Our working group focuses on three main themes. So this means metadata and a path to standardization. So we are looking into standards and promoting standards for different research topics. Our working group focuses also on the point between metadata and society. So there are many new opportunities and challenges arising. For example, the General Data Protection Regulation, different laws, European laws, local laws, and so on. And we are focusing on communication and interoperability between research infrastructures, collection holding institutions, and researchers. So we had, I put in the slides a few examples of projects we did with our working group. We bring together and communicate on knowledge and hands-on expertise concerning sustainable publishing of metadata. For this, we created, with all the partners today involved, a presentation. We offer tools for self-analysis. for this, we were involved in the project, for example, the Medlin project. If you want to know more, please feel free to ask or to click on the link. We want to integrate experiences from research infrastructures like Europeana, ERI, CESDA, and others. Also, at this moment, there is a project Social Sciences and Humanities Data Archive, which is still running for the next 2 years, where we created a research data management environment. To keep the dialogue between archival institutions and research infrastructures and the researchers, we had a project with a publication which you can find online. And another example of projects we do was the Promise project. It's a project where we want to save the internet for future generations. So these are a few examples of, in which our working group is involved. But we next week certainly want to communicate or give more information about this during our working group session. In the meantime, if you have questions, please. In the slides, you see our contact addresses. There is also a link to the working group, and above I put the link to the event next week. I thank you, and I certainly welcome you next week during our working group session. So I now give the word to Kirsten.
What I would like to do today is to just give you a brief introduction on what the Archives Portal Europe is, and to then have a look at the research options that we currently have and how that connects to the metadata that we are running in the background. So the current status of Archives Portal Europe and the network around the portal is that we are currently covering 34 countries, which includes some overseas territories. That means we've got content in a little bit more than the 24 official EU languages. So there are also materials in Georgian, Hebrew, and Icelandic. We have 5 different alphabets that we are covering. We are presenting 7,000 institutions, a little bit more than 1,100 of those are currently actively contributing content. And that leads to us having around 590,000 collections being presented in the Archives Portal Europe from all across the continent, which makes the portal currently the largest online archival repository in the world. There are similar initiatives going on in the US with regard to different state organizations. But the biggest one, which I think at the moment is the online catalog for California, is around 90,000 collections. So a little bit further behind what we currently have. The portal is the result of 2 projects funded by the European Commission, running from 2009 to 2015 in total in 2 3-year cycles. The first one was the Archives Portal Europe network between 2009 and 12. And that included 13 countries at the very beginning, including Europeana, that also started out at around the same time as the cross-cultural heritage aggregator, with a specific focus on digitized material. And in the course of the project, that also was extended to, at the end, 18 countries being represented, with 61 institutions and 14 million descriptive units. The aim was to provide a joint display of information about archival collections, their creators, and the institutions holding the material at the time being, searchable via one single search engine, and if available, linked to digital objects. In the second run, the Archives Portal Europe Network of Excellence between 2012 and 2015, the main aim was to strengthen the portal, so working on the functionalities that were presented, but also opening up to other countries and opening it up to other types of archival institutions. So in the first run, we concentrated on national archives or national archives administrations, while only in the second run since 2012, we extended that to include city archives, regional archives, but also church or university archives, business archives, or archives around specific types of archival material like media archives. So how does the content get to the portal at the moment? There are three different ways, so to say. One thing is connection via national aggregators. We also have a few regional and thematic aggregators, but national aggregators are our main way to get into Archives Portal Europe. I've included a few examples here. So France Archive for France, the Paris portal for Spain, and Archives Hub for the UK. There also is a connection with national archives administrations. So we have a few countries where essentially the National Archives is one administrative body in connection with state and regional archives. So that already covers a group of archival institutions coming to Archives Portal Europe via one way. But then we also have institutions that do not go via any connections, but provide their material directly to Archives Portal Europe. And just as a teaser, and you will see that in the titles of the slides, we are currently in the process of updating our user interface. So I'll be starting out with a few screenshots from the old design, but later on you will also see a few snippets of the new design. Just to give you an idea of how information is presented, this would be the information about an institution where you can see contact details, but in case the institution is providing content, you will also have a link to directly access their information about the archival material that they are holding. The archival material itself can be accessed either via this link or via a usual keyword search, as this was intended to be held in Zagreb in Croatia. I just did a quick search on the portal at the moment for Zagreb to see what we have on the city at the moment. And you can see that there are different options to work with the search results and to preview the search results on the very left. And once you click on one of the search results, you essentially get to the complete finding aid as it was provided by the institution. So you can also navigate from the search result that you found to anything that is in the direct neighborhood, so to say, of this search result. And in this case, we also have a link to a digital object. For digital objects, we have the principle that we do not include them directly in our own system, but essentially the user is led to the provider's website where there might also be additional options for downloading the image or for ordering copies of the image and similar things. Moving on to research options in the portal and how that connects to the metadata standards. I just want to start with a reminder of this being a multilingual and multicultural environment. 34 countries, 24 plus languages, 5 different alphabets, which when you think of a simple keyword search, of course, comes with some challenges. But we do have options to move around that and to essentially search for the same search term in different languages and potentially different alphabets at the same time by combining search terms in different languages and scripts, and also by using wildcards for more inclusive coverage. We also have 3 types of searches. So we provide a search in the archival material directly, but we also provide a search via the names of the records creators. So that can be persons or corporate bodies or families, or via search in the institution. So you might want to look at material that is in the archive around the corner, and then you kind of start your search via the institution and would then go from there to any material that they provide to Archives Portal Europe at the moment. These 3 types of searches are represented by 3 main metadata standards that run in the background, which are the encoded archival description, EAD, the encoded archival context, EAC, and encoded archival guide, EAG. All 3 of these are XML formats. And for the first 2, for EAD and EAC CPF, we have created specific profiles, so subsets of the international standard that we use specifically in the context of Archives Portal Europe. That provides us with the possibility to, for example, work with specifically predefined list of values that we can use in the display, but also for functionalities. And it also allows us to potentially be a little bit more strict in terms of requiring certain content that we need for identification and for data management. In terms of the standards, one thing that I have to emphasize is that there are different ways to say the same thing. And that's probably the biggest challenge that we as an aggregator, but also other aggregators have. There is the local format that an institution might be using as a simple export from the database that they have, or maybe even something like a CSV format that they have been using in order to describe their material. And then there's the international standards. And the international standards allow you to define profiles, as I mentioned. So it might be that an institution is using EAD as their main standard, but they might be using it slightly differently than Archives Portal Europe does. And therefore, we needed to define mappings in order to prepare for transformation from any local format or local profile of the international standard into what we have defined as the central profile in Archives Portal Europe. The necessity to define this profile for Archives Portal Europe comes with needing a basis where we can do all the kind of central processing from. So that refers to how the search index is built, but it also refers to how the information is displayed in order to get to a point where it's displayed as harmoniously as possible, given that we have information from such many different contexts. There also are different advanced search options. I've taken here the options that you would have when searching an archival material. So apart from just giving in the search term, you can also specify where that search term should be found. So for example, if it should be found only in the title of a record or only in the summary of the content. You can also look for something that is specifically with digital objects attached. So you can leave everything aside that doesn't digital objects as a beginning. And you can also search for specific date ranges. And the same categories you would also find as search filters after you have done a search. So the advanced search options would be something that you use before starting your search. And the filters would be something that you use once you have a search and want to kind of drill down the potentially vast amount of results that you might get, given the big amount of data that we have currently. And both of these are essentially based on administrative aspects. So that refers to the country or the institution that is providing that material, to the type and structure of archival collections. We have defined 3 different types of descriptions for archival material. The finding aid is the main one. So that's essentially the description of a specific collection held at one specific institution. Some institutions also provide holdings guides, which is an overview of all their collections on a very high level. And some of our partners have decided to create source guides, to which I will come at a later point. And there also are differences in terms of the level of description. So we have some examples where the description concentrates on the highest level, so it's only describing the collection itself. But we also have cases where the descriptions go up to the item level, so you would have descriptions of the actual records included. And then there are specific parts of the archival description that are taken into account. So that could be the title, the identifier, or the scope and content note in terms of where does the keyword appear. But it also could be dates, and it could be digital objects and types of digital objects. And to just make the connection where that information comes from, the administrative information comes essentially from our backend. So there's a country level, and then there's an institution level, and that information being stored in our database will be used also in order to drill down in the advanced search options or in the search filters at the end. There also are parts that are managed in the metadata as provided, and that refers to parts of the metadata like the identifier of a description, the title of a description, the dates, potentially links to digital objects, and the scope content node. And there are also options that include normalization during conversion. So one example that we have, as we are doing this very lightweight at the moment, in terms of normalizing something during our processing, is we aim to normalize any date information that is attached to the records, because only then we will be able to allow for date-based searches. And the other part essentially comes from user-based input, so providers-based input, that is prepared in the context of the conversion. And that, for example, includes a type for the digital objects, which you usually might not find in the metadata as it is prepared at the institution directly. So you will have an option to say, okay, this is an image that has been digitized, or this is a text document, or maybe even that is an audio file or a video that has been digitized. And it also refers to rights information around the digital objects on the one hand, and the metadata on the other hand. And this is something that we are currently working on to kind of increase in order to essentially allow our users a better possibility to evaluate what they can and cannot do with anything that they find in Archives Portal Europe. Next to the keyword searches, which essentially is a full text search in any metadata that is provided, we also have created a separate entry into the content that is in Archives Portal Europe, which is searching by topics. The new design will pick up on this and will extend it a little bit so that we also have an option to describe what the topic is about and to give some hints in terms of what currently is covered and might be not covered by a topic. And there are two ways to connect that to the metadata. One way is the source guides that I already mentioned before. The source guide is essentially a special type of document which allows you to combine collections either from one institution or also from several institutions that relate to the same topic. The other possibility to create topics is based on the subject headings that might already be part of the archival descriptions. To a certain extent, these subject headings are based on national vocabularies or international vocabularies, depending on the approach that has been taken. And that also creates a potential for linked data, which we will be exploring in the next few years. Topic management at the moment is done by the providers directly. So in our backend, they have a possibility to select from a list of predefined topics and to then specify if they want to use that topic with a source guide that they have created, or if they want to use it with keywords and subject headings that are already part of their metadata. And in the future, we want to extend this to also allow users to provide suggestions in terms of assigning something to a topic. Because we know, this being a manual process, there could be a lot of things that are not connected to a topic, even though they probably should be. So this is something where we want to get to more user engagement and user-generated content. And one option is the assignment of a topic, which also at the end of my part of this presentation brings me to a quick outlook. So the new design also comes with more options for users to engage with the Archives Portal Europe, but also with each other. So looking at the possibilities of users forming a network. So there will be a possibility to register and to, for example, say that you are interested in specific updates for researchers rather than the general newsletter. And there also will be more options for you to save your searches that you have done, to bookmark things, to create collections of your own based on your specific research interest, and to share those collections among each other. And with this, I'm going to end my part of the presentation and will hand over to Klaus for presenting the PARTHENOS project.
Yes, hi everyone. Thanks a lot, Kerstin. It's also great to see Archives Portal Europe. It's an inspiring project and it's great to see it in action, and I enjoy it very much. What I will talk about is PARTHENOS. That's a project that's already over, it's already finished. And I'm working in Austria at the Austrian Center for Digital Humanities and Cultural Heritage. And there I'm also involved in a project where we deal with an archive and where I develop the archive software using records in context. That's a new standard in the archive world, and I will talk about it a little bit later on. And I think it fits very well to what Kerstin said about the future of Archive Portal Europe, linked data. So I will talk a little bit about this linked data perspective, because that is something that we worked on in PARTHENOS and where we gained some experiences, and I'd like to share with you some of these experiences. So let me check if I have, yes, great. Okay. There are three parts. First, I will talk a little bit about PARTHENOS, then about the integration of archives in PARTHENOS and some of these experiences. And then we have this topic, cracking the archive. So thinking about how this archive cracking could work, could look like, and from the perspective of PARTHENOS, what we would expect from archives. So first, starting with PARTHENOS, it ended last year, 2019, and I give you a link to it in the chat where you can see the outcomes. It is an acronym, as it is often in European Union-funded projects, and it's a long acronym, so pooling activities, resources, and tools for heritage e-research, networking, optimization, and synergies. And I like to explain a little bit one part of it. So it has this strong focus, and this is a more technical part, on building up a virtual research environment, a VRE. For this, the idea was to harvest data, so it's a classical harvester, harvest data from many sources, but applying linked data formats on it and presenting this harvested material in a linked data format. There are other outcomes, because doing this needs also good training for researchers. It also needs to look into standards and think about policies. And you can have a look at the website of PARTHENOS. There are the deliverables, and there are also links to these other outcomes. Especially the training suite is something that is very helpful, and the standardization survival kit is something that helps you to choose the right standard for your research. So one of these important goals of PARTHENOS was this is to create a linked data model, and also to allow researchers to do, based on this data model and based on mappings to this data model, to do complex research questions. And that is somehow tricky, and I will go into it in the next slide. So I would say that PARTHENOS was a kind of proof of concept project, where we showed that this is in principle possible, but it's not easy to reach this goal in full. What may be interesting is that that in PARTHENOS we choose CDOC CRM as an ontology to map the data from the different sources into the harvesting platform, into this PARTHENOS discovery. And the idea was really to support research in different ways, not only about finding material, but also to discover these new research insights. How could we deal with this? And also doing some cross-disciplinary exchange. That was also an important part of the project. And what could be also then possible a review of claims of thesis and so on. So that would be some of these ideas where we would like to help empower researchers with the help of this PARTHENOS platform. The realm of PARTHENOS is general humanities and social sciences, and this does include linguistic studies, history studies, archaeology, cultural heritage, and further disciplines. But these were the main ones, and these were also the main ones because PARTHENOS also relied on existing data collections by providers, and these providers are these well-known research infrastructures like Clarine or DARIAH or Ariadne for the archaeology part. So we have this virtual research environment. This runs natively on a triple store. And as I already told you, it's modeled in CDOC CRM. One of the most important part here was the mapping of the sources of the material of the providers to this CDOC CRM data model. And it's not only about the tool, it's also about how to model, how to map, and how to find out what is the best mapping that you can do. That would be something where we could talk about hours, I guess, but everyone knows that mapping is something very crucial, but also something that is very complex. When it comes to archive materials in PARTHENOS, I guess there were two modes in general of interest. The one is this combining data. So we have material from different disciplines, and I gave you an example on this slide. So if you think about archaeology, literature, and theater studies, if someone from theater studies wants to think about how a performance was done in ancient Greek, then it could be helpful to have, on the one hand, current results of archaeology. So how does the theater buildings look like? But it could be also interesting to see what literature studies was done by means of interpretations of a theater play. And the idea was, let's combine this data, let's get from the different providers, from the different disciplines, all this information. And if someone searches for this, he or she will also get this data from the archaeology disciplines and also from the literature. So that there is a combining of data, and there you will get more context about a topic. I think that's something classical that most of the harvesters claim to help you in. But there was also something, and here comes the linked data approach, that there was also the idea to discover these new connections. And I gave you one example by combining, let's say, history studies with climate studies. So if a history scholar is working on a notebook of a monk in medieval times, this could include observations on climate events. And these observations could be very interesting for climate studies. And you would then discover this new information in a source where you wouldn't expect it, probably. And what's important in these two modes is that they rely on different granularity of details. So for this first combining, it may be enough that you have good keywords and you do a string search in the title. But for the second, you also need to go into the content part. And you would also need some background detail on the material you have. So you're talking about this granularity of details, and I think that's one of the main reasons that makes it very complicated also for integrating archive material in such an approach. So here you have a screenshot of this PARTHENOS discovery, and you already see it is based on different ways to dive into the data. So you can do this keyword search or explore these semantic relations, and that's the important stuff. You can also search by sources or use this model, the CDOC-CRM based model. By the way, this platform is open. You only need to register. You can also find it on the PARTHENOS project website. So what's one of the problems with this linked data approach, especially the CDOC-CRM approach, is it allows you to give a lot of expression into a lot of details into your data, but it's getting very complicated in a very fast time. And you also would need to expand this basic model that comes from CDOC-CRM. And in PARTHENOS project, we introduced the PARTHENOS entity model. So it could be also something where you need a lot of ontology engineering background. What's also important is that this, let's call it innovative approach of PARTHENOS, is something that relies heavily on the one hand, you need a lot of data, and on the other hand, and that's the crucial part here, the data needs to be of high quality, and you need a lot of detail about this data. So you need a kind of structured, rich description, as I call it. That means you need to have from the source data model already some fields and some data information that gives you a lot of detailed information. And as already said, the archive material is here very important to fulfill the scope of the PARTHENOS project. But when looking into it, there was not much material, archive material there. And I guess one of one part why this is so is because there were not many archives in the consortium of PARTHENOS. But the other one is that there is this missing linked data approach by many archives. And there are good reasons for this, why this is so. But for the PARTHENOS project, and I guess PARTHENOS here stands for a kind of vision in the future where we like to expand our research approaches. This is very important that we try to go in this direction to enrich as many data as possible with this linked data approach. So, and what the main message here for me is, or the main experience is, that we need a kind of shift is necessary where we go from descriptive data to structured data. And this is also necessary because only with this shift, we can go to the next step so that we not only have digital search, but also have digital analysis and research. And I think PARTHENOS gave a good proof of concept that this is something that would be very helpful in the future. And we do also have the current discussion on fair data principles. This fair data principles could be a guidance for reaching this goal, or for initiating the shift to the structured data approach. And here's important to mention that we need to have permanent identifiers, because they are the only clue for us to create that this connection between data collections. And we also need to have machine readable data. And this is also something that implies from switching from this descriptive data to the structured data, because only then it becomes machine readable. Yeah, in general, what we like to achieve is this expansion of the digital research potential. So yes, here is also a screenshot of PARTHENOS, of this search, and put this screenshot inside because on the one hand you see one of the examples of archive material that is there, and that's coming from ERI, from European Holocaust Research Infrastructure. And if you look into the details, you will see that we do not gain a lot of information there. So we have here some keywords, and that's very usual for all kinds of data that we usually deal with. We may have people mentioned here, we do have events mentioned here, but the relations are not very well expressed. And usually they are not identifiers in the background. You also see some strange spatial characters, and so it's also something about vocabularies. So there's a lot of work to do in these terms. So in general, what we are talking about is, when it comes to archives, I guess, is this description versus data approach. And as Kerstin already showed, and I think that's very usual in the archive realm, is that archive material usually relies on a title and a description. And sometimes you also have keywords. But more often you only have this title and this description, and maybe some other metadata about provenance of an archive material, but not many data about the content of an archive material. What's also there is this hierarchical structure. That's something that we missed in PARTHENOS. So but this is also something that usually comes back to the title and description of a holding. And that's something what is usually expressed in scope and content, but in a descriptive format. So we do have this title and description, but this is not structured enough about the approach that I talk about. Because what we really need is to have this explicit highlighting of the important entities, so also about persons, about places, about concepts, events. And what we also need is something that we'd like to have the relation, how these entities are related to an archive material. And I gave you an example here. So it's about how an entity is connected. So archive material is a photograph showing person X who is photographed by person Y at place A on time B as part of the event Z. And this is the information that would be necessary for this linked data approach. So we have this italic part that are the relations, and the bold part that are the entities. Okay, this I skip. So these are some examples from the portal, Archive Portal Europe, and you will see that we do not have that much structured information here. It would be interesting to see what to have an expression of the contents. Yeah, and you also see that most of the interesting part is a description in the keywords and in the general remarks. And what would be helpful if this would be modeled in a kind of structured way. Okay, because I see my time is running out. So we have, so there is a new kind of promising development in the world of archives. That's from the ICE, this new standard records in context. This is oriented to a linked data approach, and it's also very oriented to CDOC-AM. So this allows good mappings. I'll give you the link into the chat, and maybe you would like to have a look at it. The main troubles here is, and that's also something that's important to know, is that it will, that going into this direction means a lot of effort and a lot of time costs, more time to invest when recording archive material, because you need, if you switch from this descriptive part to the structured one, it's way more easier to write down something and to type it in a text field. Whereas if you need to find an entity, find the identifier and connect it, it costs you a lot of more time than recording material. And in our experience with the archive project that we are using the records in context model, it can cost you 10 to 15 minutes for one archive material. And that's a lot of data, a lot of time that usually archives do not have the resources for. So what will be also, so that's an example for our approach. What will be also important in the future will be to think about how to get these resources from different parts. So what would be the proposal here is to invest also in solutions. And that's the last part on this slide, the last point on this slide. Solutions where researchers and research projects will enrich this data from archives. And we have the crowdsourcing approach, but there could be also different ways that we can imagine. And one would be also to think about the harvesters also as the part where researchers deliver back this contextual information on archive material and other material, so that the archives are still only in their task is to record general information, but others, citizens, researchers, and so on, give context to this material. And we could see harvesters like the Archive Portals Europe, but also other projects, as the place where this data, this enriched data, could be also applied to this archive material. Okay. Yes. So in the end, it's about complex queries, and I will finish here and will hand over to Shock. That's also a project where I'm also involved, yeah, but Laura and Frank will tell you a little bit about it, and I say thanks.
My name is Frank Fischer. I'm director of DARIAH, and as such, I of course follow closely the developments of our working group on metadata. DARIAH was also involved in PARTHENOS, but I'm not only working in infrastructure, I'm also a researcher. So I also benefit from the APE or APE, or like the Archives Portal Europe. I found a lot of material that I worked with through this portal. So I really enjoy the possibility to discuss the complementarity of our work, of all the presenters today. And in our work in Shock, we focus on actionable digital data, that is data ready to be researched in a narrow sense. And of course, if we talk about archival material, it can of course transform into actionable data through digitization, transcriptions, etc. So the boundaries there are fluid. And I would argue that metadata and corresponding standards are our tertium comparationis between the aggregation of archival material and the aggregation of tools, services, papers, and also data, like we do in Shock. So what I will do now is talk a little bit generally about the Shock project, which is seeking to connect the social sciences and humanities in all their disciplinary variety to the emerging European Open Science Cloud. And this does not happen without purpose, but to be able to discuss common grounds between all the different endeavors presented today. So let's have a look at this first slide. SHOC, the Social Sciences and Humanities Open Cloud, is a really big project, not only judging by the budget that we have, but also by looking at the number of partner institutions. So there are 48 that have to be coordinated. The duration of the project is 40 months, so we have a lot of time to conduct our work. And we are now halfway in, and we can already show you some I hope, promising results. And we still have half of the time almost to finish what we started. So here you have a little overview over all these partner institutions, but since time is a bit stressed right now, just like at the bottom you see the 5 ARICs, and also big organizations like LIBER, but like I said, 48 institutions are many institutions on many levels, on the research level, on the infrastructural level, and I hope we can work, of course, on behalf of the social sciences and humanities in Europe. On the next slide, I'll try to answer the question why we even dared to contribute what the social sciences and humanities are doing to the Open Cloud project that the European Commission was starting. So what we are doing there is really trying to build the SSH cloud, like the part of the emerging European Open Science Cloud that will really speak for our communities. What we also want to do is to maximize the reuse of data, so to really adhere to standards, to common catalogues and stuff like that. Another almost byproduct is the interconnection with other research infrastructures, because we are all doing our day-to-day work, working for our communities. But it's really interesting to see how things are solved on the infrastructural level when talking to our partner RIs. What we also do in SHOC is to set up a government structure, because as you all know, projects run out and then they're not financed or less financed, and we have to set up a system so we can sustain our work. So that was our pondering from the first day of the project. So at the bottom you see the 9 work packages, but I'm not going to dive into them. The interesting one that like now for this presentation is work package 7, creating the SSH Open Marketplace. And on the next slide, which is magically going to appear, thank you, which will be my last slide before giving the floor to Laure. I want to show you, and this will be interesting to compare it to what we have seen before, the entities that we are trying to collect and aggregate and contextualize in the SSH Open Marketplace. So what we are looking at is tools and services, and to give you a number to that, so like last time we counted 1,500 tools in the humanities alone. Not all of them are still sustained. Not all of them you will need for your day-to-day research, but I think it's really necessary to organize them and not only do that, but to also see how they can reach into other kind of materials, like for example, training materials. A tool alone is usually not, not much worth if you don't have good training material, if you have good use cases, and if you can learn how to use it. We also collect workflows, because usually our work as scientists doesn't only consist in one step, but in many steps. And the workflows that we are kind of inheriting from the standardization survival kit, which was already mentioned by Klaus, will show you that variety of approaches. We also have a strong focus on data set, although this work only starts now, because first we had to screen the landscape, and what we found was that data sets in the humanities especially are not as well organized as they could be. So that is also part of our work to popularize, to not only work with data, but also to publish data, good data, open data, actionable data, because that's something that we will definitely need in the future, and more of it, because usually if you want to check data that has gone into papers from your colleagues, it's usually hard to do that, and we want to facilitate that, because only then we can be good scientists, if we can check each other's works and learn from them. And the last entity we are collecting here are publications. So starting from conference papers, going up to like larger works, and we do all that not with our own hands, but we're relying on the rich collections that are part of our ecosystem. So we are looking into providers of data for all these 5 entities. So we're usually harvesting metadata from projects that, for example, collect publications. And so there are many projects out there already doing the work that we are benefiting from. But if you look at our guiding principles, this is what we will add to the landscape. So our big unique selling point, if you will, is contextualization. So what we do, for example, is to extract tools that are mentioned in research publications. So there's a connection there. So we will create this connection in order to convey a much better picture of how research is done in our fields. We also have a focus on curation, which will be semi-automated. So since we're getting all the data from projects around us who have usually well-documented APIs, we can semi-automatize this whole work. But of course, curation, because we want to focus on quality, not on quantity, because a lot of projects around us, if you think of Open Air or even the Archives Portal Europe, there's really a lot of data, and we try to highlight the best of it, and that's the idea behind our curation model. And we do already focus on the community aspects, which means that next month we will, like I said, only halfway into the project, we will already release a beta version of the marketplace, and the whole community is invited to test it, to check it, to criticize it, because we want it to be a product that will work for the community, is coming from the community, and will really make the life of the everyday researcher easier. And with this, Laura, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Frank. So I will try to not repeat what you already said. So in terms of the timeline, for example, you already mentioned that next month we will go public. So what you can maybe have a look at more into detail if you are interested in the system specification for the whole system. That includes the first version of the data model for the marketplace, and also the system architecture. And this system specification was released in September last year. We made an alpha release of the marketplace in June this year, and as Frank said, we will go public for the beta version in 1.5 months. We are working hard to do this, and after this we have 1 year to involve community to try to make another iteration for the final release in December 2021. But what about metadata and the SSH Open Marketplace, as it was one of the guiding principles for our discussion today? First, it was already highlighted, I think, by all the previous presentation that metadata have a central role to play while building a discovery portal. So I will try to give you an overview of what it means for the marketplace developments. While creating the marketplace, we are aggregating metadata coming from other catalogues, as Frank already mentioned. So we first conduct an identification and prioritization of the sources. And for the beta release, we will have 6 sources ingested in the marketplace, so more than 3,000 items. TAPOR, which is a tool registry for digital humanities, but also beyond. The standardization survival kit workflows already mentioned. The programming historian training material. The DH conference paper to populate the publications part. The Clarin switchboard tools that are present in the switchboard. And the EOSC catalog services restricted to the social sciences and humanities part. So once we know the source, like once the source is prioritized, we map the data model of the source to the marketplace data model. This data model, and I think Klaus is much knowledgeable than me on this, so he can also maybe precise things if I'm missing things here. But the data model was really designed to be flexible. That means that we are adding new properties in this data model based on the mappings that we are doing with the sources. If we need to add new fields to describe the content and to make it more informed, we can actually do it along the road, let's say. And during and after the ingestion of our sources, we are enriching and curating the metadata. So this step, it was also already mentioned by Frank, is a mix between automatic checks and manual interventions. So we are, for example, automatically identifying dead links for URLs fields, for example, but we are also automatically creating links and relations between items to enhance this context idea. And ultimately, we really rely on manual curation to provide high quality metadata. And the plan is also to open up community contributions to allow collective enrichment process for the marketplace. And beyond the use of metadata to build the marketplace, there is also this idea that we could add in the marketplace as items, so as a tool or as service or training material or workflows, contents that can contribute to a better apprehension of metadata challenges in our disciplines. And here I would also need to relate to another SHOC work package and task, which is a task 3.5. So it's called Data and Metadata Interoperability Hub. It's a task led by the Finnish Social Science Data Archive, in which they are working, among other things, to develop data formats and metadata formats conversion solutions. So this is really something that we are in discussion to understand how we can connect it to the marketplace and to make the best out of this potential links between the two work packages, let's say. There is also so this is also part of a wider reflection about the marketplace content. That is, we could include semantic artifacts in the marketplace. So for example, controlled vocabularies, dictionaries or thesauri, metadata schemas or ontology as content. And we will release in a few, but at the end of the year, a new deliverable called Resources for Marketplace Content Description that can also, that will also explain these topics. And I already mentioned it, but I think it's important to highlight here that the global discussion about metadata within SHOC are not really happening in Work Package 7, but more in Work Package 7, which is the one in which we are creating the marketplace, but in the Work Package 3, that is called Lifting Technologies and I cannot see my screen, and services into the SSH cloud that is led by Clarin, and a very interesting deliverable in that respect is the one that was released last year, is a report on SHOC metadata interoperability problems that make an inventory of metadata sets, standards, and taxonomies that can really be of interest, I think, for some of you in this discussion. And I will stop here for this presentation of SHOC and the marketplace. Thank you.